You're listening to the M3 Podcast, a weekly micro mini message designed to encourage, inspire, and maybe even make you smile this week. And now, this week's M3. Thanks for taking the time to watch this week's M3, and I really appreciate everybody who watches these videos, and the feedback and the comments that I get are really invaluable, and it's just exciting and encouraging to see people getting use out of these each week. And I do hope that these messages are encouraging to you and maybe challenging to you, give you a chance to think about and process more what God is doing, not only in our church here at Hope, but in our community and in each of our individual lives. This week we are continuing our series looking at the temptations that were faced by Jesus and that which is common about them for all of us. The second temptation that Jesus faced is the temptation where we see that in Luke chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 4, where Satan takes Jesus up onto the temple, and it says he shows him all the kingdoms of the world. And he says, if you will only bow down and worship me, all of these can be yours. And now none of us maybe have felt the temptation to conquer the kingdoms of the world. But we have faced a common temptation. And Satan says to Jesus, you can have all the kingdoms of the world. One thing that's surprising is that Jesus doesn't challenge Satan's authority over the kingdoms of the world. And the first thing that points out to us is that the challenge, and it strikes right at the heart of any temptation that we have to use the kingdoms of this earth, to use political power to achieve the kingdoms and the purposes of God. It is as though trying to expect watermelons to come from an apple tree or an alligator to give birth to an eagle. To expect that the kingdoms of this world, which are aligned on different values and different purposes in the kingdom of God, are able to give birth to the kingdom of God. And it should be a caution to us to think that we can use political power to achieve the purposes of God. Because the temptation that's faced there for us is not the temptation to conquer the kingdoms of the world. The temptation that we face is to say that we know better. To say that that God's ways are not good. To say that we know how to do things better than God does. And we see this in the life of Moses. What's God's plan? God's plan, we see, is to give water to the people of Israel. And so he says to Moses and Aaron, go, speak to the rock, and water will come out. God's desire is to care for his people and provide for them. But Moses says, I know. He says to himself, and he succumbs to that temptation to say, I know how to do it better. And he goes out, and what does he do? He takes his staff and he strikes the rock, not just once, but twice. And the second time water comes forth. He used his own means and his own purposes to achieve the will of God. We see that in the Pharisees. They get a bum rap sometimes, the religious leaders. But we are a lot more like them than sometimes we want to admit, especially those of us that have been in the church for a long time. These guys really desired the holiness and the righteousness of the nation. They really desired to follow God in every aspect and every area of their life. But in their zeal to carry out the purposes of God, they used the political power of Rome to try to achieve it. They used the power of Rome to try to crush the followers of Jesus and to crush Jesus. Again, the temptation to use and to say we know better, and to use our own means and our own purposes to achieve God's plans. Because the truth is, God's ways are better than all of our ways. God's plans are better than our plans. And our role and our purpose is to be a follower of Him. And to do as He pleases and let His will work in each of our lives. So the challenge for each one of us this week is, where have we sought to get ahead of God? Where have we said to God, we know better than Him? Where have we sought to try to say, you know what, I know a better way to do this. I know a better way than God's way. And our first reaction might be to say, well, I would never do that. But we all have done that. Every one of us have faced that temptation to say we know better than God. And we know better than His purposes and His plans for our life. And so this week is a week and a challenge for us to process and to think about that and where we have sought to get ahead of God. Have a great week. Thank you for watching this video, and be happy to talk with you about more or welcome any feedback or comments you might have. Have a great week. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening to this week's M3. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You might also enjoy our blog, The Milk Can, online at jumpingjersey.org. Have a great week.